Takes a while to initialize it, but then it says I'm live. So we're on Sinbad's second voyage. I soon grew tired of an idle life and went to sea again with another party of merchants. This might get annoying. One day we landed on a desert island. After wandering about for a time, I felt tired and lay down in a quiet spot to sleep. When I awoke, I found to my horror that the ship had sailed without me and that I was left alone. At first I was full of despair, but after a while I began to look about me. I soon noticed a huge white object lying a little distance off, and making my way up to it, I found it was as smooth as ivory. As I stood wondering what it could be, the sky suddenly grew dark, and to my surprise I found that this darkness was caused by a monster bird flying down toward me. I had often heard sailors talk of a giant bird called the Roc, and I made up my mind that this was one, and that the huge white object beside me was its egg. Seeing in this bird a means of escape when she reached the ground, I tied myself with my turban to one of her legs, which was as thick as the trunk of a tree, and when she flew away next morning, this will be my turban, when she flew away next morning, she took me with her, I'm pretty sure. I tied myself with her turban, my turban to one of her legs, which was as thick as the trunk of a tree, and when she flew away the next morning, she carried me with her. She rose to great height, and then came down so suddenly that I fainted. When I again opened my eyes, I had just time to free myself from her when the Roc flew away again. I now saw that I had been left in a deep valley entirely shut in on every side by such high rocky mountains that it was impossible to climb them. The valley was strewn with dazzling diamonds of the largest size, and as I had nothing better to do, I filled my clothing with them. To my terror, at one end of the valley, I saw a swarm of dreadful serpents. Finding, however, that they came out only at night, I wandered about, seeking a way of escape, until night came, when I shut myself in a cave for safety. Next day, I was surprised to see pieces of raw meat being thrown down into the valley. But I soon understood what this meant. A party of merchants on the rocks above, not being able to get into the valley, had found they could obtain the diamonds by means of a clever trick. They threw pieces of raw meat down. Those fell upon the sharp points of the diamonds, which stuck into them, and so when eagles carried the meat to their nests in the tops of the rocks, they carried with it a number of diamonds. The merchants then frightened the eagles off their nests and picked the diamonds from the meat they found there. When I had watched this for a little, I thought of a means of escape. I tied a large piece of raw meat onto my back by means of my turban and lay down flat on my face. Presently, one of the large eagles caught me up by the piece of meat on my back and flew away with me to its nest above. You may guess how surprised the merchants were to find me there. I told them my story, and as they were returning home next day, I went with them. After many adventures, I arrived in Baghdad, and having made a huge fortune, I gave large gifts to the poor and began to live in splendid style. Sinbad, having ended this story, gave Hindbad another 100 sequins and invited him to come again next day to hear about the third voyage. You may be sure that the porter did not forget to come, and when the guests had all feasted, Sinbad went on with his story. I'm going to continue. This will be two voyages in one. Sinbad's third voyage. It was not long before I set sail once again with another party of merchants to seek adventures and treasure. One day we were caught in a terrible storm and driven into the harbor of the first island we reached. No sooner had we entered the harbor than a swarm of frightful savages came swimming toward us and climbed into the ship. They were so fierce and came in such numbers that we could not keep them back. They made us go on shore and left us there, taking our ship away with them. We wandered about the island, seeking food and coming to a huge palace that seemed to be empty. We entered and found ourselves in a large hall, into which there suddenly came a dreadful black giant who had one eye in the middle of his forehead. He had fearful, long teeth and nails like eagle's claws, and was so frightful to look at that we all fell down and lay on the floor like dead men. When we opened our eyes again, the ogre suddenly seized the fattest of our number, and thrusting a spit through him, pointy stick, he roasted and ate him, and then lay down and fell asleep. Full of terror, we watched about the island all next day, seeking some means of escape, but finding none, and when evening came, the ogre appeared again, and made his supper off another of my companions. This went on for several days, and at last I suggested that we should try to escape by the sea. We found plenty of wood about the shore for rafts, and when these were ready, we returned to the palace for the last time. The ogre came as usual, and having eaten another of our party for his supper, lay down and fell asleep. Those of us who were left then seized the spits, and making them red hot in the fire, thrust them all at once into the giant's eye. Into his eye, and we blinded him. We then ran down to the shore, jumped onto our rafts, and pushed them out to sea. But we had not gone far when the giant appeared, with several others as large as himself, who were throwing great stones at us, sank all the rafts, except the one I was on, with 2 companions. Having managed to get out to sea, we were at last thrown upon another island, and here we were attacked by a most fearful serpent, who swallowed both my companions. I escaped from it, however, and rushing down to the shore, was overjoyed to see a ship not very far away. I managed to attract the notice of the captain, who sent a boat to take me to the ship, and I found to my surprise that he was the captain with whom I had sailed on my second voyage, when I was left on the desert island. He was delighted to see me again, and showed me my bales of goods, still untouched. After trading with him for some time, I safely arrived in Baghdad once more, with riches so great that I knew not of their value. When Sinbad had finished this story, he gave Hindbad another 100 sequins, and next day he began the story